Myanmar, the war the world stopped watching in February 2021, Myanmar changed overnight. Before dawn on February 1, the military detained civilian leaders, cut communications, and declared a state of emergency. Among those arrested was Aung San Suu Kyi, the country's most internationally recognized political figure. The architect of the coup was Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. The military claimed widespread fraud in the 2020 election. But for millions of citizens, this was not about election disputes. It was the return of a system they knew too well, direct military rule. What followed was not just a protest movement. It became one of the most complex civil wars in the modern world. A fragile democracy collapses. Myanmar had only recently begun opening to the world. After decades of isolation under military dictatorship, reforms in the 2010 that allowed elections, foreign investment, and relative media freedom. But this transition was never complete. The military, known as the Tatmadaw, had written the constitution in a way that guaranteed its power. It automatically controlled key ministries and held a significant percentage of parliamentary seats. Even during civilian rule, the generals never truly stepped aside. The 2020 election delivered a landslide victory to the civilian government. For the military leadership, it signaled declining influence. The coup was preemptive. The Spring Revolution, the public response was immediate. Doctors refused to work under military oversight. Teachers boycotted schools. Railway workers halted transport. Government staff walked off their jobs. This became known as the civil disobedience movement. Young people filled city streets in Yangon, Mandalay, and Naypyidaw. Protest signs mixed humor with defiance. Social media amplified the movement. But peaceful demonstrations were met with live bullets. Security forces fired into crowds. Snipers positioned themselves on rooftops. Thousands were arrested. Internet shutdowns became routine. Instead of crushing resistance, repression hardened it. Many protesters reached a painful conclusion: peaceful reform was no longer possible. From protest to armed resistance, Myanmar has long been home to ethnic armed organizations that fought the central government for autonomy. Groups in Kachin, Karen, Shan, and other regions had decades of battlefield experience. After the coup, young urban activists began traveling to border regions to train with these groups. Out of this cooperation emerged People's Defense Forces, loosely organized militias aligned with the anti-coup movement. Improvised weapons evolved into coordinated ambushes. Police stations were attacked. Military convoys were targeted. Late 2021, Myanmar was no longer facing scattered protests. It was in full-scale internal conflict. The ethnic layer. Myanmar's crisis cannot be understood without its ethnic complexity. The country officially recognizes over 100 ethnic groups. Many have long histories of marginalization and broken ceasefires. The Rohingya crisis, which peaked in 2017 when hundreds of thousands fled to Bangladesh, had already drawn global condemnation. That episode revealed the military's willingness to use overwhelming force in ethnic regions. After the coup, several ethnic armed groups abandoned fragile truces and renewed hostilities. The conflict became multi-layered: pro-democracy fighters, ethnic autonomy movements, and central military trying to maintain territorial control. It was not one war. It was many wars at once. Life inside the war zone in urban areas, daily life transformed. Nighttime raids became common. People slept lightly, ready to flee. Checkpoints appeared across cities. Informants created an atmosphere of suspicion. Independent journalists were detained. News outlets were shut down. Information became harder to verify. The economy deteriorated quickly. Foreign investment dried up. Factories closed. The national currency weakened. Inflation surged. For many families, survival replaced political ambition as the primary concern. At the same time, underground networks formed. Secret schools operated in apartments. Volunteer medics treated the wounded. Encrypted apps became lifelines. Even in fear, resistance adapted. A growing humanitarian crisis. As fighting spread to rural regions, the humanitarian toll escalated. Villages were shelled. Airstrikes targeted resistance-held territory. Entire communities fled into forests or across borders. Millions became internally displaced. Border areas saw refugee flows into Thailand and India. Access to healthcare collapsed in many conflict zones. Disease and malnutrition rose. International aid faced obstacles, blocked roads, security risks, and political complications. Myanmar's suffering was immense, but global headlines often focused elsewhere. The international dimension. Myanmar occupies a strategic position between South Asia, Southeast Asia, and China. Its ports connect to the Indian Ocean. Its territory forms part of major trade and infrastructure routes. Neighboring powers tread carefully. Sanctions from Western nations targeted military leaders and state enterprises. But sanctions alone did not shift battlefield realities. Regional diplomatic efforts struggled. Agreements were announced and then ignored. Major powers weighed stability, economic interests, and influence, often cautiously. Myanmar's war became another example of how geopolitics can complicate humanitarian resolution. Shifting battlefield momentum. July 2023 and into 2024, coordinated resistance offensives began seizing territory in northern and western Myanmar. Some military outposts fell. Supply routes were disrupted. Analysts noted that Tatmadaw appeared overstretched, fighting on multiple fronts. But military airpower remained devastating. Urban bombings, artillery exchanges, and drone attacks added new layers to the conflict. Neither side achieved decisive victory. The war settled into a grinding, fragmented struggle. A fragmented feature today. Myanmar is divided. Some regions remain firmly under military administration. Others operate under resistance-aligned governance structures. Parallel systems collect taxes, administer justice, and attempt to provide services. The longer this division persists, the greater the risk of permanent fragmentation. Rebuilding national unity after prolonged internal war is extraordinarily difficult. Institutions weaken. Armed groups gain autonomy. War economies take root. The human cost compounds over time. The people caught in between at the center of this conflict are ordinary citizens. Students who once dreamed of studying abroad now hide from conscription. Farmers who tended land for generations navigate front lines. Families separated. Displacement communicate when they can, uncertain of when they will reunite. Yet even in hardship, civil society persists. Community kitchens feed displaced neighbors. Volunteer teachers run makeshift classrooms. Activists continue documenting abuses. The resilience is remarkable, but resilience does not end war. What comes next? Myanmar's future remains uncertain. Possibilities range from prolonged stalemate to negotiated settlement, to gradual military weakening and eventual political restructuring. Trust between sides is minimal. The military seeks survival and authority. Resistance groups seek systemic change and federal democracy. The longer the conflict continues, the more complicated peace becomes. Infrastructure deteriorates. Generations lose education. Trauma deepens. Delay it matters. Myanmar's crisis is not isolated. It affects regional migration flows. It intersects with global supply chains. It influences geopolitical competition in Asia. But beyond strategy and politics, it represents a broader question facing many societies: what happens when a military refuses to relinquish power in the face of popular demand? Myanmar's story is about that tension between entrenched authority and collective aspiration. It is about a revolution interrupted. And it is about millions of people navigating uncertainty, hoping that someday the sound of airstrikes will be replaced by something far more ordinary: stability. For now, Myanmar remains a nation suspended between resistance and repression, its outcome still unwritten.